like to, and then
Sure, we can
to
kind
enter.
of flip-flop what we were gonna do. So, everybody has seen the film. We just, while we were waiting, went ahead and screened that for everybody. And I know some folks had already seen it, that had come to the gallery. So I think probably one of the questions that I would have for you is, even though this film now is 20 years old, Honor mentioned in her essay that it still has resonance in today, especially after the pandemic and things like that. Why do you think it has held up so well in terms of that? What would you say has contributed to its staying power?
Well, thank you for that question. I think creative people are especially equipped for difficult times because we observe and we experiment and we explore and we improvise, and we're used to facing a blank canvas or a silent piano or a mysterious chemistry puzzle, and we make something out of nothing. And we don't get so unmoored. I mean, we do, but we can deal with it when we're in a state of uncertainty. So, like when COVID hit and everyone had to pivot quickly in nearly every aspect of our lives, um, I think folks who were used to use accessing the creative part of their being were able to handle it a little bit better than others. I mean, some people sheltered in comfort and some in extreme discomfort, but people worldwide reinvented how to live and how to survive, and when possible, how to find some joy and even thrive.
Absolutely. Um, I know that, if we can get to your presentation, it hasn't come through on my end yet, but I know that in that presentation, you were going to talk a lot about kind of the process of how you created this work. Because again, what we're seeing here is drawings that you have manipulated in different ways with different techniques. Could you talk a little bit about those processes that you employed as part of Glass Gardens?
Yeah. So what I did is I had been when during the time up to making Glass Gardens, it was the early 80s, and it was a time when our country was in a deep recession. Some people even called it a depression, but our pre-gentrified urban landscapes were peppered with abandoned and decaying buildings. We were also kind of living under the threat of nuclear annihilation in a more palpable way than we have up until very recently. And they were really difficult times. People were like lining up at gas stations trying to get gas, shooting each other at gas stations. The centers of towns were being boarded up because people were having economic hardship. So it's a very kind of similar time. And I thought a lot about survival of both body and spirit. And the piece kind of started as a feeling that I needed to put into a form. And it wasn't a stretch to imagine that particular moment, like as a near future, and imagine who might inhabit that dystopian world. And the survivor stereotype had always been kind of a Mad Max, super pumped, testosterone fueled survivor with massively powerful weapons. But instead, I portrayed an artist. So I did a lot of writing for almost a year before I started it. And I also went on bike rides around the Boston area where I was living and photographed various landscapes that inspired me, that spoke to me, that felt like they shared a feeling that I was going toward. And then I'd bring those photos back and draw pictures with graphite on paper.
Interesting. I know that you mentioned previously kind of riding your bike around, almost like looking for venues and things like that to put into that. So I do have your presentation queued up. So if you'd
Oh,
like
great.
me to, I'll share that, and then just let me know when you want me to advance to the next slide. Is that all right?
Okay, so like one of those old schools slideshows where you go boop in between each one.
All right. Yes, I'll be your page turner. How about that?
Okay, all right. Okay, so
All
we
right.
could just start with yeah, that first one is good.
Okay.
Great. So when I began the graphite on paper drawings for Glass Gardens, I decided to make the film black and white because I was thinking a lot about time. I had recently seen a print of a well-known film that had faded to magenta. But more and that kind of really scared me about working in color. But more importantly, at that moment when it seemed like everything was falling apart, I questioned the possibility of a future. And since I associated black and white films with the past, kind of as a thought experiment, I wanted to have a vantage point of looking back at the present that would someday be a past from a possible future. And now we're in that future. So here we are. I don't know if that makes sense, but it was kind of like going forward 2 steps so that you're in the farther future looking back at the future that was the past. Anyway, it's complicated to say, but maybe you know what I mean.
I
So
do.
we can go
Imagine
on
if
to
we
the
had
next
had all
one.
these chicken heads.
What's
Imagine
that?
if I was just going to say, imagine if we had had all of these chicken heads now,
Yeah,
how much fun we'd be having.
absolutely. On my screen, it's cut off a little bit on the, it's
Oh.
not full
David,
frame.
could you
Oh, there we
unzoom
go.
out?
Oh, there we go.
There's
Yeah.
a zoom on the top left. Could you press top left corner there?
Okay, hang
And
on
it should
one
be able to click to like 75%, I think.
second. Let me see where that is. Is that format?
Left side, other way.
Oh, left side.
Yep.
Oh, zoom. Yeah, I see it. Okay, so sorry, guys.
Let's try that.
Is that better?
Or 50 maybe. Oh, let's see what that is.
Can you see
75 is fine,
everything
I
now?
think.
Can you, is it possible to just do like Command F or something? I'm not sure if that works with that. Or Control F if you're on a PC. No, maybe it
No,
doesn't. Okay, never mind.
Oh,
It's just
all
going
right.
to fine.
Yeah.
That's fine. Maybe then if there's some that look too small, you can zoom them up.
Okay.
So, so yeah, so as I mentioned, in addition to the main character, I foreground the environment as I'm always interested in stories that landscape can tell. And so I biked around empty neighborhoods and abandoned industrial sites and shot photos for inspiration. And then from there, I kind of developed the screenplay more. So we can take number 3. And then I storyboarded from there. And storyboards really help me kind of get a sense of the flow. And it's funny, people think of screenplay and storyboard as not being something you need if you make a film without words, but it really helped me kind of keep track of what I was doing and sort of pace out the film. So we can go on to the next one. So I included images that pointed to consumer and capitalist society, which also prioritized military spending over human needs. So here she's watering her tomato plants with like what might have been the head of a military statue. And you can go to the next one as well. And yeah, and she finds a little shard with Ronald McDonald on it, which was something that Honor noticed in her essay. I was very impressed with her powers of observation. So we can go to number 6. So to add spontaneity to my daily drawing, I asked friends to give me objects that I could include in backgrounds or foregrounds. So sometimes in my storyboard, I'd say she picked up something, and I wouldn't, if it wasn't key to the script, I just wanted it, I wanted room to add things that came my way more spontaneously. And that's because animation traditionally is kind of front loaded, like it's, you do your storyboard and your screenplay and, and everything's all mapped up because it's so much labor. You don't want to make too many mistakes and waste a month of your life. So, but I've always tried to figure out ways to add daily creativity and daily invention to my practice. And this was kind of a fun one where somebody would come over and say, oh, I brought you something. And then I'd try to figure out where to put it in. And then the other thing in my process, and in retrospect, I realized it was a form of meditation, but I didn't realize it at the time. There was a YMCA with a pool down the street. And in the morning, I'd work a little bit, just like for maybe an hour or two, and then go for a swim for 30 minutes. And I would swim 30 minutes without stopping. And during that time, I would think about the scene that I was going to animate that day. And did I want it to be from her point of view or a long shot, or what was she going to be picking up? So I would conceive of the scene underwater. And that was a really great practice. I would love to do something like that again, but I don't have a pool down the street. So yeah, so some of the images were cutouts. Like after I drew them, I'd cut them out and I'd animate them under my 16mm movie camera. So this is some little moths and hands with a tire, because when she pushes the tire, it has to rotate. So I probably had 3 tires. And then this one is showing the tabletop of my animation stand. So it has a glass platen holding the layers together, the elements together, and I'd lift them up and do replacement animation for these moths. So so I just substitute one for the other, and moths move very kind of in not like a really super fluid way. So it was a really easy way to animate them. And then I put the glass platen down, take my frames, lift the platen up, change the moth, etc. So yeah, and then some of the cutouts were actually punched paper. So they're punched for alignment and set on pegs to film. And so they were sequential drawings. And some other drawings were drawn and erased under the camera. And after 9 months of drawing, I was ready to shoot. And I had shot most of my earlier films on an Oxbury animation stand that looks kind of like this at Harvard, which was a school that was down the street from me. And I was able to have access to it for about 3 years. Different professors there would say, sure, you can come in nights and weekends and holidays and use the equipment, which was incredibly gracious of them. But eventually I lost my access there, and it was just when I was starting on this film, or about to start on it. So an animation stand is like a room-sized copy stand with a mounted camera pointing down at a tabletop. And the artwork's generally pegged, but if you're doing cutout animation, it's moving around there. And at the time, they cost like $50,000. So you can switch to the next frame. So I was really fortunate to find a brilliant master machinist, Peter Lindenmuth. He just an amazing, like Albert Einstein guy. I could tell you so many stories about him. He was so brilliant, and people at MIT always wanted to hire him to help with their inventions, and he only worked on stuff that interested him. And I brought him over to Harvard and showed him the stand. And I also told him that my dad is a carpenter and that anything we could build out of wood, Dad would help me with. And he drew up blueprints and then said, look, if you come and work in the machine shop with me, I'll charge you $9 an hour and we'll build this stand. So I became a little early, I can't even say journeyman, but like a amateur machinist. So I worked with Peter for 6 months, working, that's the lathe. And I was the only female there, so I always wore a necklace just to I don't know, shake it up a little. So there's the next frame. That's, yeah, I think I was working on the east-west track at that time. And then the next frame is my wonderful dad in his incredible clothing, his rose shirt, I guess, with cutting out the circle for the animation stand. So the circle in the middle has a disc that can do a tilt or any kind of circular movements that you need in your action. So yeah, that was just finishing it up, assembling it, and you can go to the next one, and that's the finished stand. So Glass Gardens was the first film that I shot on this completed animation stand. And like the character in the film, we also scrounged some of the metal parts from the trash and then carved them on the lathe. But other parts were things I had to buy. So we can go to the next, oh, those, just, we can go back there for a sec. Those square things on the sides are polarizing filters to help cut down the glare on the glass platen. So then I had to think about what I was going to do about sound. And I had been listening to a lot of Brian Eno music, and there was one of his ambient records called Day of Radiance, and the musician was Laraji. And just like, I just was somebody who just dared, I don't know how to say this, but I just went, well, I'll just write to him and tell him I'm making a movie and see if he'd want to be interested in working on it. And I had no idea what he would charge or anything. I had a little tiny grant, but he was really excited to work on it. And he came and lived with us for a week while he worked on it. And so that was a beautiful part of this film. And yeah, and then the film traveled around the world, but it turned out that the film stock wasn't stable and it was at risk of being lost forever. And then I was fortunate to get a grant from the Women's Film Preservation Fund to restore the original. So it's now in the collection of the Museum of Modern Art, which is really wonderful. So I know that they'll take good care of it and I don't have to worry about it.
Absolutely, that's quite an accomplishment. So why don't we go ahead and launch our first poll, and then the students can take that quickly, and we'll come back and finish up our Q&A. All right, let's go ahead and get to some of our questions. The first question that came from the audience was kind of a drill down on the title, Glass Gardens. And the question really is, does it have a deeper meaning?
Well, I guess I'd like to ask whoever asked that question what that means to them.
Oh my, that's a good response. We'll see if we get an answer here. I can tell you, because they'll have to type it since they can't speak, but I know one of the things right away when I saw that I connected with was, in this dystopian future, you have a lot of glass that's been broken. You have, the moth that's trying to get into the container, the moth that's in the container, all of that. So glass comes up quite a bit, throughout the film. So that would be my answer if I was answering. Am I close?
I think that's really nice.
Awesome. So another question was about the moths. Do the moths have meaning particularly for you as an individual? Is that why you use them?
Yeah, I think in our culture, we sort of value butterflies and don't value moths as much, because moths eat our clothes and our grains and stuff like that. But I think of them as a kind of survivor, and that at the end, you always expect the moth to do themselves in with the flame. You know, whenever there's the expression of moth to a flame. And so it's sort of an expectation that it's gonna die at the end, but that it survives. And it when it turns from black moth on the lantern background to a white moth against the sky, it feels to me like the uplifting of a spirit.
In your on your website, and we did post, I don't know if we posted the website, but we did post a link because there were a couple of questions in the chat about rewatching the video, and so we had posted up at the top the link to your Vimeo site, and I believe there are other animation shorts that you have there as well. And this question kind of ties in with it. It's about your general inspirations. Where do you find inspiration? What inspires you? And I do know that in addition to kind of environmental issues, which you touch on in this film, that you also have done films that deal with sexuality, creativity, which we see here as well, chaos. So could you talk about those things as well?
Yeah, since animation is so labor intensive, I don't usually like to start on something unless I'm really passionate about it. If it has to be kind of a pressing question for me, or an obsession. So for example, with my very first film, I was really young. I was like in the height of celebrating sexuality. And so that was the inspiration for that film. This film, I spoke about what my inspiration was, but it was really questions about survival. And I made a anti-nuclear film. I also made a film about kind of living in chaos. It was a performance. It's kind of lost, although recently a video appeared that I have to bring it somewhere and put it in a form that I can look at it and see if I might actually have a copy of it, because it was a live performance, The Octopus's Exaltation. And then the next film was The Flooded Playground, and that was inspired by having a daughter and kind of going through childhood again and watching all the sort of traumas and trying to put together what is real and trying to put together, I don't know, just getting through childhood trauma. It wasn't necessarily that my daughter was going through it, but it was triggering a lot of things in me and a lot of memories. And then I wanted to use the format of fairy tale. And so I did a lot of reading about fairy tales, and made that film. And that's also on my Vimeo site, if anyone's interested. It's my longest film. And after that, I was like, I'm never making anything more than a minute. That one took like 5 years. So I started being very involved in various environmental issues and started thinking about where did this big mess we're in start. And I was thinking about the moment when European explorers and exploiters started traveling around the world and gathering wonders and bringing them back to Europe. And um, and that the painters, there was a rise in merchant capitalism and kind of consumerist addiction. And one of the symbols of that to me is like the still life paintings with all these like fabulous items from all over the world, and who knows how they got them and who had to die for them to get them. And so I did a series of animated still lifes. And then I decided, since I also paint, I thought, okay, well, I'll do still lifes, landscapes, and portraits as part of this series of environmental stuff. So I did a bunch of those different ones. And I think the portraits were the most challenging because I've never worked with real humans before, and using people's bodies and faces and stories in such a direct way was kind of hard for a shyer person like myself. But the pieces came out wonderful, and they've been shown in some galleries.
Very cool. I know too, when we were talking about inspiration, and this really came through in the works that you put together, the slide deck that you put together, that your dad definitely had an influence on your creativity. And you told me a lovely little story about growing up and kind of a space that he created for you. Would you mind to share that? I love that.
Sure, yeah. And so Dad was a self-taught carpenter, and he modeled for us that anything you wanted to learn, you could figure it out how to do it. So I think sometimes it's dangerous because I go, oh, I could go fix that, and I'll get up on a ladder and fix something and not even know how I'm doing it. But, get some gum, get some gaff tape, get some hot glue, all the recipes for disaster or survival, whatever. And at one point he was noticing how much I love to make stuff. And he, down in his workshop in the basement, he built me a little table, almost like a standing desk, just a thin little table so that I could have a workshop. And that was really fabulous.
I love that story. And really that nurturing spirit that he showed you, I think you picked up on in it, and you see it in your work, especially this one here. I mean, the narrator, the main character in Glass Gardens is really nurturing, that landscape that she's navigating through with the tomato plants and all the animals and all of that. She's really a nurturer as well. So that came through, I think, both in your life, but also in your creativity and your practice. So I did have a question, because you've mentioned this now a couple of times about really the fragility of the creative work that you've done and the film itself, the actual product. Could you talk a little bit about how things have changed from analog process to digital process?
Yeah, no, that's something I think about a lot. In the 90s, when it suddenly became affordable to have a computer at home, I ran into a person who I had given animation lessons to, and he said, the way you always wish you could combine animation and live action, and usually you'd need hundreds of thousands of dollars to do that, or really fancy equipment. He said, you can do that at home with computers now, and it's not that horribly expensive. And I was just kind of so excited. I was just like, okay, take me there. How do I get there? And so there was a little place in our neighborhood that taught Photoshop. And I just thought, okay, well, I'll start with that. I had been taking photographs all my life. And I thought, okay, well, I'll just start there and then figure out how to move them. And so I took like 8 lessons, and then I got a computer and then just went online, and there were all these, there wasn't so much, I don't know if YouTube even existed, but if it did, I wasn't noticing it so much, but there were all these forums. So I called them like geek chats, so anybody interested would say, hey, here's a trick for doing this. Or you could write, hey, my Mac is running like a slug on Quaaludes. What do I do? Or, like just all that kind of stuff. And people would all talk to each other. And then I started teaching myself how to do After Effects. And at the time I was doing a lot of freelance work for Sesame Street. And I called up my producer and I said, I want to do my next piece digitally because I'd been drawing all my work. And she was like, well, how do I get to see them? And I said, come on down for lunch, because we didn't have any way to show stuff back then. So she came over for lunch. I took her over to my computer, showed her what I was doing, and she said, go for it. And I'm so grateful to her that she wasn't like so attached to my style that she didn't want me to do it. So I was kind of earning while I learned. And yeah. And so now I've been teaching After Effects type classes for quite a lot of years, but now I'm going back and putting a lot of analog lessons in, and the students love it. Everybody seems to love real film. Everybody wants to draw with paper and pencil. In fact, I've been just drawing with paper and pencil a lot lately as I'm thinking through my next project. So yeah, I think there's a place in the world for both of them. I don't think it's a either or.
Absolutely. And I think I'd mentioned to you that Albright has facilities where we still teach, photography, both digitally and analog. And then we had a film minor for a long time that I think is still in the books technically, but again, the same kind of thing in a long history, over 40 years of filmmakers series here as well. So there is still a great interest in that. And I think I'm glad to hear that you also see it coming back in being interesting to other students in other areas as well. So I have posted that this is our final opportunity. If anyone else has a question for Lisa Crafts, now's your time to type it in chat or the Q&A. Are there any final thoughts that you'd like to leave us with as well?
Let's see. I guess I was just thinking about, since we were talking about resilience, I was thinking about an excerpt from a poem by the poet Rita Dove, and it's a poem called Transit, and it was inspired by a concentration camp survivor. And it ends with these 4 lines: let it be said, while in the midst of horror, we fed on beauty. And that, my love, is what sustained us. And I think about that because we're living in really complicated times. Besides COVID, we have environmental collapse, we have the threat of autocracy, we have the uncertainty of, like, people can't agree what is truth. I mean, we're just in a crazy, crazy time. And I think feeding on beauty is a good way to kind of keep your heart and soul going.
I concur. That's amazing. That's a great way to sum up, I think, your own work. And certainly the job of artists, that they, when they become an artist or they're born to that, they shine a light on sometimes things that are not beautiful, but there's beauty within the work that they're doing. And that's really what I think brings us together and connects us as humanity, no matter what our differences are. So I love that. All right. Well, it looks like there's no more questions. So we're going to launch our last poll. And while folks are taking that, I just want to take the opportunity to thank you so much for being with us today. I want to thank everyone also for their patience as we work through some of the technical difficulties. This still turned out to be an amazing opportunity to talk to you. I know I got more out of it again, even today. Every time I talk to you, I get a little bit deeper down, and I just appreciate that so much. So thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your wonderful artistry with us as well. And we just appreciate it so much.
Thank you. And thank you to Albright and all you folks out there, especially to David and Honor and Stephen and Rich.
Yep.
And yeah, so I'm
You got,
very
yep,
happy
you got
to
all
have
of them.
joined you
Kate,
today.
yep. Yeah, we appreciate it so much. Thank you. And everyone have a great day. We'll stay on a little bit more for people to finish up that poll. But thank you again so much for coming, and we'll see you soon.